Okay, Monday, 10th of November 2025. So, Adrian's daily vlog, sharing smart stuff men should know. Concentration risk, or Bitcoin's concentration risk, does not mean risky. Now, I did a video about this a year or so ago with regards to volatility is not risk, and vice versa. They're separated. Volatility is the price, liquidity, we could say, and risk is the first principles of what it has, in this case, Bitcoin, what it has or doesn't have. For example, no CEO, no office, no tariff risk, no balance sheet risk, etc., no earthquake risk, whatever else. So I was strategizing about this idea of concentration risk in a portfolio with regards to you are overly exposed to one particular thing in the portfolio as opposed to diversifying it. So then I realized, if by reverse engineering, if we take this principle and apply it to a Bitcoin heavy portfolio, there's concentration risk, quote unquote. There's 50% plus of Bitcoin. But then I realized that actually, hang on a minute, even though there is concentration risk, quote unquote, there are fewer, numerically speaking, fewer attack vectors. Interesting, which kind of nullifies that at a portfolio level. To say, okay, there's concentration risk, but there's no CEO risk, no scandal risk, no balance sheet risk, no tariff risk, no earthquake, like I said earlier, no earthquake risk, no head office being raided by the police risk, there's no supply chain risk, there's no sales risk, things like that, scandals in some fashions, things like that. So then I realized that actually, hang on a minute, you could argue that there are fewer risk vectors with Bitcoin than there are in a Bitcoin heavy concentrated portfolio than there is with traditional portfolios, diversified or not, having 1%, 2, 3% position here and there, here and there. So actually then, by reducing risk, the meta pattern here is, to reduce risk, we need to shed these different risk vectors, CEO of that company, CEO of that company, that balance sheet there, tariff risk over here, tariff risk over there, you name it. But over here with Bitcoin, even though you have quote unquote concentration risk, you have fewer risk vectors. You could say security, protocol, and social consensus with regards to what's happening in the society, the protocol not changing with regards to the BIPs or the nodes, and security risk, where you store your Bitcoin. You know, that old mantra again, not your keys, not your coins. Very nice. But then, that's powerful. So that kind of Bitcoin then kind of flies in the face of concentration risk. Because even though there is, quote unquote, to speak binary, there is concentration, or the portfolio is concentrated, you have fewer risk vectors. Whoa. You have fewer risk vectors over here than you would have with a diversified portfolio over here. That's quite profound. That's very deep, that is, to understand the meta risk at play here. That's quite interesting. Because then we could say, in a speculative, poetic way, we could say that by this logic, Bitcoin defies the laws of finance. You could say, as a digital asset, so it's a commodity in some way, but there are fewer risk vectors, CEO, balance sheet, etc., etc. So therefore, you could say that an over-concentrated portfolio may not truly exist in some way, especially when you consider the past performance. Past performance does not equal future, yeah, but then you go deeper to the first principles, and that mantra comes into play. Bitcoin has no top because fiat's got no bottom, meaning it's the debasement trade now. That slips into it. As the system is fundamentally printing money, and everything appreciates in dollar value, and yet at a first principle level, Bitcoin has a fixed supply, meaning the US debt clock really. As more money is created, M2, M3 money supply, it's going to find its way into Bitcoin as per education. In spite of people understanding that it's concentration risk, because they'll realize, the first principles over time, give it 5, 15 years. So then maybe over the next 15 or so years, there'll be a mental shift from a diversified portfolio to a more Bitcoin-centric focused portfolio, because there are fewer risk vectors and more people get the first principles. The debasement trade, which is being advocated now, and understanding the first principles. 21 million fixed supply, the protocol. You're essentially going long on the protocol and going long on the consensus, societal consensus, and the infrastructure, the node, whatever else, as I mentioned just now. Fascinating. Protocol level, that's it. That's fascinating. That's fascinating because then, as I said earlier, Bitcoin defies the laws of finance. Again, poetic way to say it and articulate it, but that is interesting. Does concentration risk truly exist in Bitcoin? The only way, within reason, you could say there is concentration risk is if the system itself changes, meaning the debasement trade just gets cancelled and reversed, and the debt clock, the US debt clock, starts decreasing over time, meaning there is deflation in the system as opposed to inflation, expansion of the money supply. So then, at an even deeper level, the meta trade at play here, the meta pattern is you're going long on the irresponsibility is a loaded word, but you're going long on the money printer, basically. So therefore you could say, well, to what extent do you think that the money printer, QE, for example, is going to stop? I don't think it's going to stop, for example. Okay, then there is no concentration limit, so to speak, because if you think if you're 1,000% certain that's going to continue, then applying the same logic, you should be 1,000% sure that you should have exposure to Bitcoin. If the debasement trade is baked into the cake, societally speaking, or banking infrastructure speaking, or economically speaking, then by the same energy, same emphasis should be on Bitcoin as a hedge against it. Interesting. So then you can say there's no such thing maybe as a concentration, over concentrated risk to Bitcoin. If this is standard over here, then that should be equally standard over here. Debasement, Bitcoin. You could then say you can't have this and have Bitcoin, debasement up here as it is. And if your Bitcoin allocation is down here or wherever, then there's a hell of a mismatch there with regards to the financial plumbing at a deeper fundamental level. Wow, that's fascinating. The more certain you are the debasement trade is to continue, the more certain you should be to have Bitcoin in the portfolio, binary speaking, and the larger the position should be in the portfolio as well. If you think the debasement trade is going to continue for the next 100 years, then you definitely need Bitcoin in there as a hedge against that, to ride that wave. The trend is your friend. Wow, that's fascinating. Very, very fascinating. But otherwise, Adrian's daily vlog, sharing smart stuff men should know. Subscribe for more, and you will see me tomorrow.